I'm coming in hot.
Yeah, my name is Grant Huhn. I'm a realtor with Blum Real Estate. I've been working with them for 7 years now. And prior to that, I taught high school at West Salem High School. And prior to that, I was a counselor for delinquent teens, boys that were transitioning out of McLaren back to regular life. Some of them were going back to their family of origin, but a lot of them were going to short-term foster care, long-term foster care.
Okay.
And before that, I built custom homes. And before that, I was a youth pastor and children's pastor right out of college.
You've done it all.
Yeah. A lot of experiences that were all just kind of, for folks that are listening and not watching, I'm have a hand over my eyes, just not picking a path.
Yeah.
Just drifting along through life, wherever the current took me, wherever the boat took me, and wherever I was told to go, and having and enjoying it well enough.
Yeah.
There's more to the story. We'll get into that later, but
right.
The diversity of experiences is not planned. It was just drifting through life.
Gotcha. Okay. So Bloom, is that
Gladys Blum is the gal that founded it.
Okay.
Is
that a Salem family?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The whole family is amazing, and she is the real deal.
Where is your guys' office?
It is at on Commercial Street, 735 Commercial Street Southeast, kind of kitty corner from the public library.
Okay. So it's after South Block Apartments, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, after South Block Apartments.
Okay.
As you leave downtown heading south, couple blocks.
Okay. Something I don't think I've ever said on here is I actually helped open South Block Apartments.
Okay.
I was there during the first phase. I think Anderson Construction did the first kind of big U phase, and then I think Dalkey finished the last piece there. But my wife and I were the second people to ever live in that building.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of a trip. Obviously it's big. I mean, for Salem, it's a big space. And so if you can imagine that huge building, there was two people living for about 2 weeks.
Oh, gosh.
So, I mean, we could run down the halls, we could yell, and I think we're the only, I'm trying to think where the other person was. We were on the top floor, but it was an interesting experience living in a giant building and no one else, because the move-in dates hadn't happened yet.
Sure.
That
sounds like a mix of kind of fun and exciting, but also, at least to my mind, a little bit spooky.
It was. Yeah. Well, just so quiet, so large. That was, that's actually, I've never said this. That's how me and Adrian literally got to Salem. We moved, I got a job helping lease all those up when it was being opened.
Okay.
And then, we were out in McMinnville at the time trying to get to Salem. We were looking for a unit, and then the manager at the time said, "Hey, do you want a job? And then you could live here and work."
Oh, yeah.
And so we were like, "Boom, let's do it." But I was just driving by there, I want to say yesterday, and thought I had seen your guys' location there.
Purple and
I almost felt
white.
like there was some construction going on, like a roof or something, but maybe that was on something else.
It could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some offices around there as well.
Okay.
We have the building right up against the street.
Okay, so you said 7 years with them?
Yeah, 7 years with them.
Seems like real estate is doing well. I mean,
yeah. It has been the whole
I hear
run.
stuff, but then I don't know. I guess I'm not really seeing it yet.
Yeah, the last 2 months have slowed way down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that, I mean, that's, I don't know. I don't even know if I like talking about this, that, or the other thing. I'm not very educated on the whole. I see different slowing downs and recession.
Sure.
In your industry, is that kind of the trend? Like it's definitely
cyclical.
Yeah, it's definitely slowing.
Oh yeah, it is slowing right now for everyone across America. I think it's slowing down, and as far as I know, I'm far from an expert on this. I think it's slow across planet Earth.
Yeah.
Um, I think economies in other countries are even getting hit harder by inflation
Mm-hmm.
and uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone's kind of holding their breath.
Yeah.
And a lot of things have hit pause for a little bit. So that happens,
Yeah.
and probably needs to happen in individual lives on
Right.
country scale and global scale.
Right.
And that's where we're at now.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some people that, they're frustrated because, right now they're like, man, these are where the rates are at and the home prices are at. And it just really tough to make something work right now.
And headlines, I think, are a problem, probably in a lot of industries or in a lot of topics. Headlines can be a little problematic because people see. Just yesterday, I saw an article on Apple News, and the headline was something like housing price crash inevitable, or something like that. And then, I mean, that dramatic,
Right.
alarming headline.
Right.
And the article said some cities will see a little decrease in home prices. I thought, guys, the facts and the headline are not the same. They're not lining up there.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
They got to, catch eyeballs, and they
Right.
got to sell advertising. That's part of their main job, is to
Right.
sell advertising.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of headlines. And in fact, since the recovery, since housing market came back in 2012, so 2013, 10 years now, we've been seeing headlines of housing prices to come down.
Right.
Housing, it's way grossly overpriced.
Right.
Housing crash imminent for 10 years now.
Right.
And that's probably more human nature than anything else.
Yeah.
There's a little bit rabbit trail here, but the other week on Twitter, I came across a super long thread. I didn't realize it was going to be that long, but some guy had collected headlines of, and if I remember correctly, the topic was men are not as masculine as they need to be. Men aren't as tough anymore as they need to be. And that's a topic we hear today all the time.
Yeah.
And he traced it back dozens and dozens and dozens of actual photographs of headlines that were printed back to the 1600s. So 300 years. For 300 years, the headline has been, men these days are not as tough, and it's going to cause problems. Men these days are not as tough. It's going to cause problems. So I see that a little bit with the housing market.
Yeah.
Housing prices are going to come down. It's going to crash. And I think my job as a realtor, a huge part of it is educating.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I do that enough. Is just educating, hey, here's where things are at for you and your individual situation. Here's where things are at for Salem, Oregon, or Marion County, or Oregon, or America. But yeah, it's certainly in a lull or a pause as we cycle through our little ups and downs.
And doesn't it kind of slow during the wintertime anyways, or no?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So that's not abnormal.
No.
I mean, for like a state like us that.
Yeah. If you look at the graph of home sales plotted monthly, it's very much like this the last 50 years until COVID. And then 2020 and 2021 were the first 2 years that I'm aware of, in the last 50 years at least, where housing sales didn't go down in the winter. And I can't explain it. Just there was a crazy frenzy, a crazy demand, and not enough homes.
Yeah.
And sale numbers just kept going up through the winter in both those 2 years.
Yeah.
Which is unusual, but usually it does go down.
Which, when I think about it, the house that my wife and I bought in West Salem, we were living in Kaiser, an apartment. We bought a house in West in 2020.
Okay.
And then we sold that one. No, we didn't. We bought it at the end of 19, so it was before COVID. I was thinking we bought a house in COVID. No. Fortunately, we bought it before COVID, so that was a nice thing in terms of my wife and I had talked about how that could have looked different if we were in the apartment complex, like hunkered down for so long, as opposed to like having a backyard to go out to and just having more space to go to.
Sure.
We bought it at the end of 19, and so we had talked about how, man, that that was nice to just have some more space.
Yeah.
As we were quarantining and staying inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, that made me think about COVID, but no, we bought it before COVID. Okay, well now I'm even more intrigued. We spoke a little bit out there, and I had said I watched some of your stuff and kind of knew it sounded like you were a teacher at West and then real estate, but I didn't know you built homes and were in ministry. And so take us back as far as you want to take us back, and what that journey has been like and the challenges, and you kind of know the conversation that I'm trying to have on here. And
yeah, sure. My story is that I essentially lost the first 48 years of my life. 49 years of my life were basically lost. And it sounds so crazy to say. The further I get from those years, the more it seems like, no, that couldn't have happened. Or that was a movie you saw. Or that's someone else's story. But the first 24 years of my life were lost to daydreaming. And I didn't know it was unusual. I didn't know it was a problem. I was perfectly happy to be living in a daydream. Born to a bit of a difficult family situation, as too many children are. Not because their parents are villains, but because their parents were born into a difficult family situation. And that happened because their parents were born into a difficult family situation. That's a separate topic, but one of my favorite topics is parenting and how to transform parenting. Actually, I wrote one of the little manuscripts I've written is titled "Better Parenting Will Save the World," and then I changed the title because the word "better" is a judgment. Of you're not doing it right.
Right.
You're not good enough.
Right. You
failed. And I thought, oh, that's not the message that's in what I'm talking about here. But born into a difficult family dynamic that was hyper-religious and very much sin and punishment. The Lord told me you did something bad today, so now you get beaten. That sort of thing. And difficult and tragic, but again, my parents weren't villains. They're not necessarily the bad guy in the story. It doesn't take much to feel compassion for them. I mean, one step further into the story, and you get to compassion for them. In spite of their mistakes. My brother and sister constantly talking about how difficult our childhood was, kind of when we hit the teenage years and on, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And I would say, "Oh, you guys are exaggerating to make a joke. Oh, they're just trying to make it funny. That's just a story you're telling." And they'd say, "Well, do you remember this event?" I'd say, "No." "Well, do you remember when this happened?" "No." "Well, do you remember when this happened?" And this, just dozens of different moments. And I had no memory of any of those things. So I would remember that my brother and sister had told me the story of it, but I had no memory of it. And they would say, I think you were kind of zoned out. Fast forward decades, and my brother and sister and I talk every day, pretty much every day, and have for a long, long time. And I've really been, especially this year, kind of overwhelmed with what my brother and sister were faced with back then and throughout our adulthood. Do we pull him out of his daydream? Because that can't be healthy. Do we pull him into reality, which might break him? And what a heartbreaking decision, even if it was at the subconscious level, that my brother and sister were making. We recognize, we have a sense that this dude is really zoned out, and that perhaps that's the escape that his brain has done. That can't be healthy. But gosh, if we pull him out of that, if we wrestle him out of that, if we yank him out of that, if we insist that he face reality, would he survive? So what a heartbreaking gift that they gave me to, aware that I was spaced out, zoned out. So from before I had memories, my little boy brain did what human brains do. The brain is just a survival mechanism. How do we keep this organism alive? That's its foundational function, survival mechanism. How do we get sustenance in them? How do we keep them out of danger? And so my brain, before I even had, the memory of thought, before it wasn't something I planned, it just said, hey, this isn't safe. And no one is coming to save you. And you can't save yourself. So we're going to take you far away. And the more dangerous this gets, the further away we'll take you. And by the time I was in grade school, if I was awake, I was gone in daydreaming.
Like all the time?
All the time. I don't have memories of the first 24 years of my life. And I have a couple things that stand out that are unpleasant. And then other than that, it's stories that people have told me about things that I was a part of.
Wow. Okay. I'm trying to,
Yeah.
I'm trying to hear what you're saying, right? Cause when I think about daydreaming, I think about, I just lost 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And now I'm back locked into doing whatever it is I'm doing. But you're saying that you lived in
the daydream. Yeah. And the daydream was,
Really?
I was a filmmaker.
Really?
And as the years and decades went by, that world where I was a filmmaker got super rich, super vivid, super detailed, down to the speeches I would give at the awards I would receive, down to shots, camera angles, sequences, dialogue, on set. In this fantasy world, I just got more and more detached from reality. I was this filmmaker who was very successful, very highly regarded, innovative, super creative. And my experience in it was just that I was a really creative person. I didn't know that other people weren't living this way. I would play entire basketball games, have no memory of the basketball game. Congratulations, game ball, you were high scorer.
Really?
I would do, I was made to play the piano. And there was one summer where I was forced to practice an hour and a half every day. That was the condition of that summer. So in one summer, an hour and a half a day, that's just the nature of repetition.
Yeah.
I got really good.
Yeah.
I would play piano pieces to a standing ovation and have no memory of the piece, of the event, and just looking out at people standing and clapping. And I had a sense, this is kind of interesting to me to look back on. I remember sitting down and the church is full, 300 people, and I'm going to play for the offering. And I know at some level, I know I have to check my brain out or I won't be able to play the piece because it's 100% muscle memory. And if I think, what key am I in? What chord comes next? Where do my hands go? I won't know. So I would sit down, feel the piece was very moving or emotional, and I would get into it. I would feel it, but I had this vague sense of I need to check the brain out and off into filmmaker daydream. So 24 years of daydreaming and being pretty content to daydream because I didn't have to make decisions and I didn't have to face some of the things my brother and sister faced because they were real people. and
they were aware that this was happening?
Yeah, I think so. They knew that things were
you weren't seeing what they were seeing.
Yeah. They knew that I wasn't seeing what they were seeing, and they knew that my experience was a little more pleasant than theirs.
Okay. Man, that must have been tough for them.
Yeah, they would say no or why or things like that, and then face some violent consequences. And I never said no or why, and got off a bit easier.
Okay. So then I wonder if this reality is happening to them, but then you're not recognizing it, if that made them ever wonder if they were seeing things the appropriate way. Do you know if they ever thought, like, are we not reading this?
Oh, no. I think they were aware of
So it was
reality.
It's clear that you're not seeing what is reality.
Yeah, this quiet, spacey kid
Okay.
is missing a lot of it.
Okay.
And he's probably better off for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even now they are even see it more clearly, able to articulate it more clearly that, yeah, you were you checked out, and that probably was. I don't know if it's too dramatic to say that saved you, but
gotcha.
Possibly.
Okay. Wow. So for 24 years.
Yeah.
And then
I'm done with Bible college. I went to Central Bible College in Springfield, Missouri.
Okay.
For 4 years. Loved the people there, every last one of them. I don't remember it, but I remember people. I remember their faces. Remember a lot of their names, and remember the stories I was told. And kind of have is a little bit difficult thought for me is I have like a vicarious relationship with my own life. Do you remember that time in college when this and this and this happened? I have no memory of that, but I remember hearing the story, and I hang on to the story. I can repeat the story. When I try and picture it, I'm not in the story. I'm kind of watching it. But so I have all these stories and can repeat them and enjoy them and know I was there because I know I was there.
Yeah.
I know I was in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah.
At Central Bible College.
What about feelings?
Feelings.
Okay.
Faces and feelings.
So you're feeling something.
Yeah.
You just can't necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
Feelings and a fairly emotional guy all throughout that time. More emotional than guys are allowed to be or willing to be or are told they could be. Mm-hmm. And possibly because I was checked out of reality and wasn't necessarily tuned into all that message of don't cry, be a man, grow a pair, all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I was willing to get teary-eyed. No problem getting teary-eyed about, out of joy, out of pain, out of empathy, whatever. So remember feelings and moments that are connected to feelings. I don't have detailed memories of it, but I know, oh yeah, that was a meaningful moment down there at that bonfire at the missions service. I don't remember it, but I remember the feeling. So places, I remember places, faces, and feelings.
Okay.
And graduated college and came back to Church on the Hill by Enchanted Forest. And did 3 years there as a youth pastor and children's pastor. And in 94, 95, shortly after starting working there, at the time, I didn't know what was happening, just depression one day, Depression was there. I didn't know what it was. Feeling hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
A very strange sense of there is no hope. And not even that, there's only a little hope. It was a sense of there is no hope. And feeling, I wasn't as aware of this at the time, but feeling lonely, like a strange, profound loneliness. No one cares. No one knows. No one is going to care or know. All combined with it. And I didn't know what it was. But it was depression.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple interesting things happened along the way there. And I'll try to get through this a little bit quick because it's kind of relevant to the story. I was also building houses because ministry didn't pay enough to cover the bills. So I'd build houses through the week and then on weekends do the ministry. And just fell into building houses for an amazing father and son team. Orville and Dave Parsons was the father and son.
Okay.
They were so generous and so patient and so skillful. And they built a lot of high-end custom homes and would do everything from foundation to finish.
Oh, wow.
At a very high level.
Wow.
Just craftsmen.
Yeah.
In almost all the trades. They would sub out electrical, plumbing, heating, sheetrock, roofing, and we would do almost everything else.
Wow.
And when I was in college, I was dating a girl one time who was born in missionary kid, born in West Africa. And we dated a while, and she was a really neat person. And one week, her folks came back to the States to visit. And I went and met them. And the dad says, "Hey, do you want some of my old college textbooks?" And I thought, no, I do not want your old college textbooks. But my nature was to smile and say yes at all times.
Mm-hmm.
What an easy-going, happy, pleasant guy this guy is. So I said, "Oh, yeah, yes." And I remember thinking. So he gives me these old college textbooks. I never opened them, never looked at them. Fast forward several years, the Depression hits. And probably 3 or 4 months into the Depression, I have this realization of I can't live. It is not possible to continue living feeling like this. There is only one solution to this pain. And pain is a useful word there, but it's not the most accurate way to describe it. It was different. Depression is different than pain or sadness. But there's only one solution to what I'm feeling, this depression, which was very confusing to me. I have to make it end. It is so miserable, so difficult, so hopeless and so dark. I have to make this thing end. And there's no way to make it end. And probably only within 3 or 4 months I had that thought. And I remember I went out into the little storage barn behind the church. I was living on the church property. And in the storage barn, found an extension cord and made a noose over the rafter and piled up some old spools and a bench and stood on them and put my head through the noose. And because it was an extension cord, it didn't tighten. It kind of rubbery and it gripped. And it was quite a bit more physically painful than I was expecting. And I let my body weight hang in the noose and realized that I wasn't fighting. I'd stopped fighting. I'd given up the fight. And it wasn't peace, but it was the closest to peace I'd been in ever at that point. And so I wiped away some tears after a while, took the noose off, and the memory of those moments of not fighting carried me for about 4 or 5 days. I would think back on the feeling, what it felt like when I stopped fighting. And years later, reflecting on the whole depression, while I was in it, over and over again, I had this image of being in the deep end of a pool. and I don't have the energy. I can't touch, and I don't have the energy to get to the end. So I stop swimming, sink to the bottom, rest for a little while, and then push off from the bottom. And the push off from the bottom carries me to the edge. This is... So for the next 24 years, I practiced suicide. When I couldn't fight any longer, I'd stop fighting. And so, like I said, 3 or 4 days, or 4 or 5 days, that memory of that, of no longer fighting with my head through the noose carried me. And then I couldn't live anymore. And I went and found a gun, 22 rifle, in my dad's closet. And there was no rounds. He didn't have any bullets for it, which was strange. I thought, it was, in hindsight especially. It's rare that you'd have a gun without bullets for it. And one thing about depression that probably saved me that day and other times is after the depression left, I heard someone talk about their depression and use the word the impossible task. That when you're depressed, everything becomes an impossible task. Well, why didn't you go get your medication filled? I was literally not able to get into the car, and that wasn't my story, but that's the story this gal was telling, describing the impossible task. And when I heard the phrase, instantly went, whew, all 24, this flashback through 24 years of going, oh my gosh, I remember so many days, thousands and thousands and thousands of days where waking up in the morning and sitting on the edge of the bed took all the energy I had, and I still had a whole day ahead of me. So I wasn't going to go out and drive and buy some bullets. Didn't have much money anyways. But I remember thinking, could I do this? I mean, would the physics work? Can I still reach the trigger with the muzzle and my chin? And oh yeah, I can. Could I pull the trigger? Oh man. And every click felt like peace, or felt like the closest I was going to come to peace. And so, like I said, for the next 24 years, I lived a secret dual life for 24 years, from age 24 to 48.
Did you have a family?
Got married shortly after the depression set in.
Okay.
And for those 24 years of depression, about all I did was fight for my life and hide that fight. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of interactions. Because I was in the ministry and teaching and different jobs and loved people. I kind of want to grab my calendar or my calculator and figure out, over 24 years, is it possible to have hundreds of thousands of interactions? And I had, 200 kids at a time. So in the course of a day, so it easily is hundreds of thousands of interactions. And in almost all of them, I was fighting hard to keep that other person from knowing what was really going on, to make it look like I was listening, to make it look like I was giving, to interact with them and be a part of the conversation, to keep them from knowing that at that moment I was fantasizing about how I could kill myself in that building or in that area in the quickest, easiest, least conspicuous way. Or I was hanging on until the day ended. Because I was going to race home to get home before my wife and kids did, and loop a belt around my neck and shut the other end of the belt in the door, and then see if this would be the time I didn't catch myself in time. Or other things that I would do. I don't know if it's important to talk about those things, but
did you I'm asking you this because I have suffered before from depression And being with my background of being a pastor's kid in my faith and what I believe, I almost felt like mentally I compounded things as well, because I thought, well, I believe this faith that says hope and whatnot, and now I'm feeling the opposite of that, and I almost like mentally, I think like made myself feel even worse, because I'm thinking, well, I'm the one that grew up with this belief system, and I'm feeling this way, like almost feeling like I'm someone that shouldn't be feeling this way because I grew up, with this gospel of hope and peace. And how am I feeling this way? Because I've been taught the opposite. And I felt like during my time, I almost like was harder on myself, because I felt like, well, someone like me in my upbringing, I'm the last person that should be feeling hopeless and defeated. And that like that kind of like, I don't want to say worked against me. I don't want to say my faith worked against me, but I certainly put like layers on top of how I was feeling, in terms of how am I even feeling this way? Because I'm supposed to be a guy that believes in this, and this is hope and peace. And I was just curious, with you being a pastor, did any of that, like, how am I even feeling this way? Or I'm supposed to be preaching peace and hope. Like, this is what I went to school for. This is what I think I believe. I'm just kind of thinking out how I felt. Was there any of that with?
Not in my experience, not for what I was doing. It was so total and so brutal and so relentless that when I was in it, I wasn't planning, strategizing, thinking. I was fighting for the next breath and fighting to keep anyone from knowing that. And my wife of 26 years now, she drove me to the ER several times and didn't know how bad things were. Then I'm going to jump forward a little bit in time because it answers your question. After the Depression left, which we'll get to in a second, I shared a little bit of the story publicly, a tiny little bit, in March of 2020. And since then, 2.5 years ago, not a month goes by, hardly a week goes by, that someone doesn't contact me privately to say, that's my story, or that's my child's story. And really a super short version of my story is, if you're struggling, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling, there is hope. You're not alone, and there's hope. And that's the whole story. But after I shared my story, I think 2.5 years later, 55 people have contacted me privately to say that's my story or that's my child's story. And of those, the first 10 people that contacted me, 7 of them were pastors. And several of them said, that's my story too, and I've been able to get help, and I've shared with our congregation. And most of them, more than half of those 7 pastors said, I feel like I can't tell anybody. I'm supposed to be helping others, and yet I need help. I'm supposed to be shepherding others, and yet I'm struggling. I feel ashamed. I feel like I'd be judged. I feel like I failed. And I didn't have those kind of thoughts, but I can see what you're saying. I hadn't really thought about it before, where it'd be compounded by the religion or the faith or expectations. Yeah.
I mean, watching my dad go through different tough things with different churches, I think might be one of the reasons that I never I mean, I never really felt called to ministry in that capacity, but what I've witnessed has also been being in a paid ministry role. I mean, I've had a pretty good view from close up of how people judge you and how, and like that feeling of like, well, I'm a pastor, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I certainly can't say it because I need to act like everything's fine. And how like lonely and difficult that profession can be, because that's one of the few that, you're really, I mean, the society, it seems it makes you feel like you shouldn't be feeling that way, which is like when I was kind of going through my stuff growing up in that, maybe that's why I felt that way. I like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way because I'm the one that grew up listening to the message of hope and peace, but I don't feel that at all. And then beat myself up even more. Like, well, how could I not? Like, I'm the guy that has heard that story. But yeah, all that stuff definitely resonates with me, and kind of the journey I've watched my parents go through in ministry, and how difficult some of those bad breakups can be, and being authentic humans, even in ministry. I think it's really difficult because it's one of the industries that, for the most part, you are supposed to kind of have it all together and not struggle with, many things. And then at least my experience and what I've been around, it doesn't seem like it's been the most conducive to be vulnerable and to tell your board or your whoever, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Cause it's usually, oh, well, you're out then. Like, it's not I don't know, like what I've experienced in church I have felt like the churches have not had a great exit plan for pastors that maybe have struggled with some things, and where maybe they do need to be removed or they do need to leave, but how do you still care and love for them on their way out, as opposed to, well, we're done with you now, see you later. So anyways, that kind of just...
Yeah. The religious aspect of it really does compound the problem, because the religion says, we have the answer, capital T, we have the answer. So if you're depressed, well, you have the answer. You already know the answer, Right. The answer is this religion or the figure we worship.
Right.
And then when I'm in the depression, no verses, no prayer, no fasting, no personal sacrifices, no searching the scriptures made any difference.
Yep.
And there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
I remember I read the book of Job over and over and over and over, like 3 times in 1 week, the whole book. And on that third time, and I had this weird thought, I remember writing in the journal way back when. I don't remember writing in it, but I've looked at it and seen that I was going to read the book of Job till I had the answer. Here's a guy that had a similar experience of loss and possibly depression.
Yeah.
Oh, no brainer. Just read that until you catch the answer, see the answer, hear the answer. And I got 3 times through it. And at the end of the 3rd time through it, I was really struck by the realization, out of the blue, had this thought of, oh man, Job is asking why for a lot. That's all he's doing, is asking why.
Yeah.
And at the end, the answer he gets is, I'm God. He never gets the answer to why. He just gets the answer, hey, I'm God. Which, for him was enough, for a lot of believers is enough, for a lot of situations is enough. I stopped reading the book of Job, at least in my little exercise there.
Right.
Because it seemed like, that's the answer of the book of Job, and that doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
At least immediately.
Yeah.
So the religion can compound it, like you said, I think especially for pastors, hey, we have the answer. A lot of my friends and the majority of my friends and family are believers. And there's been several of them who, once they found out about my depression, or if it came up, if there was a sense that I was struggling even while I was in it, there was a little bit of a dismissiveness on their part of Jesus. Just pray.
Right.
You're Jesus.
Right.
Jesus it. It's Jesus. You know the answer. It's Jesus.
Right.
And I would think, it's been 15 years of wanting to die.
Yeah.
And while holding really firmly, desperately to the faith. Right. So is there a chance there's more to the answer than Jesus?
Yeah.
Now that I've said that, I do remember really wrestling with some confusion and resentment, and even thoughts of, is God enjoying watching this? Because 3 months of it, that was rough. Here's your relief.
Right.
5 years of it, hey, so sorry. Here's the relief. 24 years of wanting to die almost every day, and living closer to death than I did to life, and being completely hopeless and completely lost, and in such misery that looping a belt around my neck and shutting it in the other end in the door was a regular occurrence to get through the rest of the day. That pissed me off a little bit.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Would you daydream? So the first 24 years, daydream, then you fall into depression. Yeah. Would you also daydream during this time as well?
I guess I didn't finish the little story. So that college girlfriend, her dad gave me the textbooks, and years later started doing construction. And in the 5 or 6 years I did construction, there was only one day when my bosses were late to the job site, Orville and Dave Parsons. One day that they were late. And I arrived at this little job site out in South Salem, and they're not there. And I had gathered a bunch of things I was going to give away to Goodwill. And I tossed those books, those old textbooks from 1940s, 1950s. Nobody needs them. I don't need them. There's no class that's ever going to use those books.
Yeah.
And I tossed them and a bunch of other things in a box. At the time, I didn't know that giving things away was a common symptom of suicidal ideology or depression. And I get out of my car at the job site and I walk around, look at how the foundation is set up, and think about what we're going to do. I throw some dirt clods, chase some hornets, get back in my car, and 45 minutes. And it was before I had a cell phone. And without looking, I reach in the back seat of my little blue Honda Civic and pull a book out of that box. Just grab the first thing. It was a book. Flop the book open. The page I flopped it open to said, when an adolescent's daydreams get too far removed from reality, it can foster depression. It's instant recognition of, oh my gosh, what? And I think at that time I didn't recognize the daydreaming was a problem. I still thought it just meant I had a very agile, creative mind, more creative than other people. I didn't know that it was a problem, a big problem. And I just stared at that page for a long time. And the book is called The Psychology of Adolescence from 1946. I still have that book. And I was really struck by that thought of, the daydreaming is at least a factor, maybe a big factor in the depression. And so I said, I just got to stop daydreaming. And I couldn't. I couldn't focus my mind into the present. And it has been a 28-year journey of wrestling my mind, disciplining my mind, or trying to control it. And it's gotten certainly way, way better. But so for those 24 years of depression, age 24 to 48, yeah, daydreamed a lot. It was still a useful escape.
Mm.
Um,
Do you think that was a big component on why maybe the depression lasted so long? That had you been more locked into reality and not daydreaming, maybe you could have, I don't know, researched. I don't even know what word I'm looking for with this, but in terms of like you grab this book that sounds, I don't know how you feel about if that was just ironic or if there was a God factor in that, or I don't know how you feel about that, but I just kept thinking, like, I don't know if I've heard someone say that the depression has lasted as long. I know I certainly haven't met someone that has been depressed for a quarter of a century. But then I was just thinking, like, I wonder if the daydreaming as well, you weren't locked into the reality so much where you're like, I'm going to figure out why I'm going through this depression. I was just curious if you thought that had any kind of, the mechanism that your brain was doing, it just was taking you somewhere else, which wasn't in the present of how can I try to defeat this? How can I, look up or research or whatever it might be, like what's going on, rather than you saying you just randomly, because someone was late and you were going to get rid of it anyways, and you grab it. I was just, that's why I was curious if you were still daydreaming, if that was maybe something that, I don't know.
Yeah. And in those 24 years of the depression, I would daydream more intentionally.
Gotcha.
Like prior to that, I was lost in daydream as a habit, as a survival mechanism or coping mechanism. And then when I was in the depression, it's hard to depression is hard to describe if you haven't experienced it.
Yeah.
It's not sadness. It is, but it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's not being brokenhearted. It is, but it's more and different than that. But there'd be so many times where the feeling was, I can't live another fraction of a second. I cannot live anymore.
Yeah.
And one way to deal with that very difficult thought was to daydream. Another way for me was to write suicide letters. Hundreds and hundreds of suicide letters over the decades, sometimes through the night, sometimes just late into the night. Then I would feel a little better and tear them up or burn them and flush them, the scraps down the toilet. Or if I'd typed it into Google Docs, I'd delete it and empty the garbage can.
Did you take any medications?
Yeah, starting in about, that's an excellent question, a useful one. Starting in 95 or thereabouts, the girl I ended up marrying before we were married said, very, very sweetly and tenderly got me to go see somebody. And I don't remember what she said, but I remember it being a sense of being cared for. Which was something I needed and didn't experience very much. And they put me on a medication, and throughout the years, 5 different medications, and have them all written and timelined and everything. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head. 5 different medications. None of them seemed to touch it at all. And I didn't have a lot of hope for them. And again, I think it really wasn't me trying to be irresponsible. It was the fact that I was dying and wasn't able to manage those sort of things. And one picture or image I had all throughout this 24 years was an image I kept coming back to over and over and over again was being lost at sea at night. And that was what it felt like. I was lost at sea at night. I didn't have the strength to swim to shore, and I didn't even know which direction shore was. I wasn't going to push the doctor to get the medication dialed in because I was too busy just keeping my head above water. And
during this time, married, and from what I could see on social media, it looks like you have 2 kids.
Yeah, 2 girls.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you have children during this time, and you're raising kids.
Yeah.
And they none of them have any idea that you're wrestling with this.
Wife and daughters don't. The girls have no idea. The wife has a vague idea now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't know about how many nights I was in the guest room sobbing on the floor writing suicide letters. They don't know any of those details. My wife knows them now. The girlies don't know them.
Oh,
so
okay.
Wife and therapist. Maybe I haven't talked with the therapist yet, but talked with my wife about doing this podcast and sharing more details. And she said, well, you have to be sure to tell the girlies before the podcast airs.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll listen.
Yeah, some of the details. So they didn't know. And it was the girls. My wife and I have twin 18-year-old daughters.
Okay.
It was the girls that having twins was more deeply fulfilling than I was expecting. And maybe that's parenthood. It is parenthood, but as I look around and observe people, not every dad is just receiving pure joy from the experience, which is tragic for the dad and for the kiddos.
Yeah.
For me, having kids was so fulfilling, I could hardly believe it was real. And so the girls, when they were littler, we always call them the girlies, they kept me alive without knowing it. And there was so many times, especially near the end, when I would go into their rooms, they would be at school or somewhere else. I'd go in the room and lay on the floor and sob because I knew I couldn't go on, and I knew how bad it was going to hurt them. And how bad it was going to hurt them kept me going when other things didn't work. So I'm teaching during the bulk of this. And teaching's a difficult thing anyway, especially at the public high school level. And there was one year, maybe 2007, where I would pull into my assigned parking spot at the back of West Salem High School, and I would sit in my car crying, saying to myself, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't go in there. I don't have the physical energy to walk from here to there. I don't have anything emotionally left. And I was supposed to be there at like 7:15, and 7:25, the 5-minute bell rang. And the 5-minute bell rang. And I would literally have to psych myself up day after day and go, open the car door and walk into the school. And twice that year, my principal, Ed John, who was just a magnificent human and a brilliant principal, came to me and said, hey, how are things going? Oh, yeah, things are good. Things are good. Yeah, I've just, noticed you've been late a bunch, and wondering if there's anything I can do. That was his response to that, which in hindsight, I thought, holy crap, that's good. It wasn't, I'm going to drop the hammer and be warned because I'm ready with the hammer. It wasn't any shame or scolding or anything. It was very professional, got the point across, but also very compassionate.
Yes.
And I would say, no, I'm fine. But as I would write about it, journaling, it was another thing that would keep me going. Hundreds of pages of journaling, maybe thousands of pages of journaling. over those years, I would often write the phrase, "It feels like pouring from an empty cup."
Mm.
And on one of the earlier podcasts, one of your guests used that exact phrase. I think it was Lacey or
for some reason
it was a girl.
I think it was Lacey, actually, and I'm going to see her in a few hours working out at her gym. I'll ask her that. When you said that, I thought Lacey.
I thought it was Lacey,
not.
but it might have been. I think it was Lacey because it wasn't Danny with the healthcare thing.
Yeah, and it wasn't Bryn.
And it wasn't Bryn, who was my former neighbor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, out there.
In West.
Yeah.
I just FaceTimed Bryn last night.
Okay.
And I was like, it's so weird that you sold your house in West.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a good friend of ours and a client here.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think it was Lacey.
Yeah,
as I recall.
So. That's what I thought when you said that.
I thought, oh man, I recognize that phrase and understand that it's a familiar experience for people. You know, it goes back, takes my thoughts back to that idea of, hey, if you're struggling, you're not alone.
Yeah.
If you're struggling, there is hope. Hang in there. So I was teaching and it just felt like I was pouring from an empty cup. And then we were talking before the show where teaching was really hard for me because I made it harder than maybe it needed to be. The summer before my first year of teaching, I had this idea and I thought, holy crap, this is the greatest idea a teacher has ever had. I'm going to go to all my peers, family, friends, neighbors, people my age, and ask them, what's one English assignment from high school that you still remember? And I'm going to start teaching with a basket of timeless, meaningful exercises. So I went to neighbor, friend. I stopped at 11 people, I think. None of them remembered a lesson. All of them remembered a teacher. I don't remember any lessons, but I had this one teacher who was so nice. I don't remember any lessons, but I had this one teacher who was so mean. I don't remember any lessons, but oh my gosh, there was this one time where Mr. So-and-so, 6th grade, 1979, they still remembered when this teacher embarrassed them in front of the class 30 years later. And I start my first year of teaching with this thought of, I had better not be playing a 4-year, 4,000-hour game with these kids. 30 years from now, if they're not going to remember anything from the class, then what the am I doing?
Yeah.
And so I developed my own secret 30-year standards. 30 years from now, what do I hope these kids remember from this 50 minutes or can do because of these 50 minutes? And I kept it secret because I felt I had to keep it secret. And even now, looking back, I'm convinced I had to keep it secret because the district said it's Common Core state standards. All instructional time is all Common Core state standards. If your objectives are not on the board, if your targets are not on the board, if your walls aren't covered with the Common Core state standards, if you can't connect every sentence directly back to a Common Core state standard, we're scolding, dropping the hammer, writing the negative observation, that sort of thing. So I had these secret 30-year standards that I had behind every lesson I created. And the first one was, I'm going to light up when every kid walks in the room. And for most of these kids, I'm going to be the only adult in their life that lights up when they walk in the room. And for a lot of these kids, when they walk in the room, the response from every adult is criticism, judgment, humiliation, shame. You're going out in that. Who wants to play with you? What are you doing now? You're going where? Don't you have home? I mean, just criticism, judgment, or ignoring. Walk through without a word. Or violence. Molested. Hit. cigarette put out on their arm. I'm going to light up every kid that walks in the room. So for 12 years, I tried to light up every time every kid walked in the classroom, at least at the beginning of class. And it was easy to do. To see that kid, the quiet little, kind of dirty, scraggly-haired kid, and go, oh my gosh, look at this miracle. How are you today? I am so glad to see you. Thank you for coming. I have to come. I don't know. Not really.
Yeah.
But I'm still glad to see you.
Yeah.
And another one along that same lines was I wanted to find one strength or positive thing and point it out to them. So I would say, hey, somebody was talking about you the other day, and just cold terror across their face. What did I do? Every time an adult says that to me, I'm going to be shamed, punished, critiqued. And I said, yeah, someone was saying that you're really good at skateboarding, and I didn't know that about you. Oh yeah, I love skateboarding. I've been doing it for 5 years. I got my first, all about the skateboarding. Or, hey, I saw yesterday, I was watching you and saw what you did in the hallway. Hang the head, brace themselves for shame and judgment. Oh, I saw when you held the door open for the DLC kids and how you were talking with each one that went by. And, oh man, that was cool. That was so legit, what you did yesterday. Well, they're just so fun. And you know Danny, that one? He sings to himself all the time. And I had some other little standards like that were a little harder to achieve, but had these 30-year standards. But because of the depression, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was hard because there's a lot of times I'm shaking their shoulders in excitement or giving them fist bumps and thinking, I can't live another fraction of a second. It was very weird, and looking back at it, it seems impossible. There's no way I should be alive. There's no way I functioned, did anything. And then also, like we were talking out there, I never fully believed in academics.
Mm-hmm.
And I would stand up at the start of every single class period for 12 years, 10 to 18 classes a week. And the thought in my head was, okay, hey class, let's get started. This is not what they most need.
Mm-hmm.
There's not one kid in here that most needs how to find theme in Shakespeare, where to stick a comma, how to format the conclusion of a research paper. That young man now lives with his grandparents, and I don't know what the story is. That girl has fresh cuts on her arm. 2 kids last period told me that this guy's an alcoholic. She's been gone 2 weeks, and now she's really skinny. That kid's been unusually quiet for a while.
Mm-hmm.
This kid's really disruptive, and it's not because he's a bad kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's because something else is going on. So I made teaching like exponentially more difficult for myself because all I'm being paid to do is let's get through some Common Core state standards. All I'm expected to do is let's get through some Common Core state standards. But I think partly because of the depression, because I knew what suffering was. And holy crap, I did not want people to suffer. Partly because of the depression, I was really tuned into, oh man, this is not what these kids need.
Mm.
And I would overthink it, and it would just really balloon and snowball into something unmanageable. And I would think, I worked mainly with seniors, and there was something I called the senior question. And every one of the seniors had one question on their mind, And there was one question they were asked a dozen times every single day their senior year. So, what are you doing next year?
Yeah. What's your plan?
What's your plan?
Yeah.
None of the seniors knew the answer to it.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm thinking, my God, we've had them for 13 years, 7 hours a day. And they don't know the answer to the only question they're being asked?
Yeah.
Not one uncle, relative, counselor, youth pastor is asking them, hey, what's the quadratic equation?
Right.
Hey, what are 3 causes of the Civil War?
Right.
They're all asking
Yep.
the same question. And I thought, what have we done to these kids? A lot of them felt a great deal of anxiety about it.
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap, my life is about to shift. I've had 18 years of doing the same thing every year. Well, 13 years, starting in preschool or whatever. 13 years of doing the same thing, quite a routine, and everyone else is doing the same routine. And now they're saying, whoop, haha, your life no longer gets to look like that. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do? Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. No one's ever once talked to me about that. And I would think, kind of out of frustration, it would take 30 minutes to walk someone through what their aptitudes are.
Yeah.
It would take an hour to get through a really cool program of goal setting and finding yourself.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
We haven't spent 1 hour with any of these kids in 13 years, and we've had them 6 hours every day. So the depression, my secret 30-year standards, not being sold on academics, and then this brokenheartedness and frustration with not helping kids answer the one question. And the way I've phrased it before, and the way I think about it, is that compulsory education has a 1-question final exam, and none of them know the answer to it.
Yeah.
There's a 1-question final exam to high school. How come we haven't helped them know the answer to that?
Yeah.
So in teaching along and loving the students, really caring about them, really enjoying them, they really did. Every single student really felt like a miracle to me and exciting to me and fun to me. The quiet kids, the difficult kids, they all just seemed super fun. And I had a vague sense, and still do, of they were worth more than 50 minutes of where to put a comma. So having fun, being playful was one of those secret 30-year standards. Having fun and being playful, which I don't know for sure. I would guess some people interpret it as silliness. Mm-hmm. Oh, Grant is kind of a silly teacher.
Yeah.
Or that's not very grown up. Or that's not responsible. That's not professional. That's not what teachers do. That's not his job. Well, I guess the kids love him, but that's not what educating is. But I had a much different perspective on playfulness and play. And that is, it's the real work.
Yeah.
It's the actual work.
Yeah.
And that's supported by research, playfulness and play. And anyways, so.
Do you still have, I think you mentioned it, but friends that are still in education that are teaching?
Yeah.
Have you ever had this kind of conversation with them in terms of, I know like I related to you when you said kind of the analogy of, do they really need to know the Shakespeare thing? Like I would feel like kind of like you, where if I was teaching, I might think, man, I could think of a lot of other more important stuff I could be teaching them than what I have to teach them. But I'm curious the other side of that argument, if they're like teachers that would go, no, I think they absolutely need to learn where the comma goes or Shakespeare, and here's why. I'm curious if you've ever had any conversations with people that are still in education, still teaching, and like what their opinions of like what you have said about education is. Have you talked to any of your friends? Have you? I always think of the flip side of whatever coin we're talking about, and what would they say?
Brilliant.
Because I like the playful stuff. I lean more towards you, but I'm sure there's people out there that would say, well, let me give you, my reasoning on why I think it is very important to
be more serious or whatever.
Yeah, this, and this.
Yeah.
But I say that because I have some close set of friends that principal, AD, counselor, my wife, PE, and a lot of times when we hang out, they talk shop and kids and districts and this and that, and how to handle this situation, how to handle that. But I was just curious if you had friends that are still doing it, if you've ever had that kind of conversation of, here's my thoughts and what I struggled with, and eventually you transitioned out of. I just always like to hear like the flip side of that coin.
Oh yeah.
If someone would say, okay, but here's why I think that's not true.
I hear you, but
yeah.
That's a brilliant question, an important question. The first thing that comes to my mind is that when and then I'll circle back more closely to the question. When I was teaching, I was really struck constantly by how much care teachers needed, and how not just how little care they were getting, but how caring for teachers wasn't even on the effing table. There were teachers who were alcoholics. There were teachers whose children were experiencing severe physical problems. There was teachers whose children were experiencing severe psychological problems. There were teachers whose marriages were falling apart. There was teachers with such severe anxiety they couldn't attend staff meetings and would get regularly disciplined for it. The teachers needed care, and instead, to my observation, they were getting... I was trying to be delicate in how I say this, but the way it was the district.
Yeah.
Was standing there with a hammer.
Yeah.
It was how it felt and how it looked, and saying, we're going to absolutely smack you down if you speak up or step out of line or demonstrate weakness, and we're watching, and we're going to smack the next one down, and we'll smack you down again. There wasn't any, I love the word tenderness, makes people uncomfortable. That's not why I love it, but it often makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's a missing ingredient in too much of humanity. So the teachers needed care, and they weren't getting it. And they said, hey, here's 200 students, and you need to get all of them to the same level. And you need to do it really quickly, and you need to do it every single day. And we're watching you. And then we're going to ask a little more of you. You also need to do this and this and this, and be mindful of this. And we've changed the class attendance and student tracking program. You need to learn that software, and it's complex. And we've also changed the grade book, and we actually need you to get more graded assignments in. And we're actually upping the amount of periods per day, and we actually are shortening the periods. And so we need you to do an impossible task and then do it faster and then do more of it. I grieve for teachers just because I don't think they're getting care. And I think it'd be useful even if someone said, hey, teachers, vent, share your story.
Yeah.
Share your triumphs, share your heartbreaks, share your stresses. Hey, teacher who's going through a difficult divorce, here's a hug. And it's going to last until you feel it. That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So the teachers are struggling and doing the best they can. Mm-hmm. I've had the conversation or I've shared some of my thoughts on teaching or my struggle on teaching with some teachers. It's hard I haven't figured out how to share my perspective on teaching with teachers without me worrying about it sounding judgmental. Hey, I don't believe academics are nearly as important as we're making it. Mm-hmm. You do. Mm-hmm. you must be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You must be missing something. You must be, there's some more important things that you're missing. And that's not the message, and that's not the point.
Yeah.
So the teachers that I'm close enough with to have had that conversation are the kind of teachers who also really care about students.
Yeah.
And they just happen to be professional educators. And I wasn't a professional educator. There's some teachers up at West who are just really good at educating. And a student, start of the year, by the end of the year, they're so much better at that skill and that topic because of that teacher.
Yeah.
My girls had a number of teachers like that. There's teachers up at West who are, think of two of them. Probably doesn't matter to say their names. Who are literally some of the best teachers in the nation. Drew Monarchy, Mike Lampert. They've been recognized as they have the awards to prove it, but they are just so dang good at what they do. And the core of it is care for the individual student, not care for that subject. So it's a tough one. Yeah. Teaching is a tough one because everybody has been through it, compulsory education, and everybody has had some negative experiences from it.
Yeah.
And even if the good experiences far outweigh the negative experiences, that one public shaming, that one mean teacher, that one injustice stays with the person and gets attached to education and school. Oh, you won't believe what happened this one time, junior year. So it is a tricky thing, and I don't know what the solution might be. Also, the format of school kind of has to be what it is. Parents do need to send their kids somewhere for the bulk of the day. That's not optional for the majority of parents.
Right.
It works very well
for
the culture and the society and civilization.
Yep.
And yet it's not as rich for the student as it could be. And I think by 6th or 7th grade, almost all students begin to ask the question, when will I ever use this? And they never stop asking that question. They either stop asking it out loud and agree to play the game, or they're just butting heads with the system for the next 6 years, or they crash and burn, drop out, poor grades, resentment, that sort of thing. Yeah. They never stop asking that question, or maybe a better way of saying that is that question never stops being relevant.
Right.
When am I ever going to need the quadratic equation?
Right.
Wait, I can see how some people would need to know advanced algebra.
Correct.
But I don't know that a lot of adults need to know advanced algebra.
Right.
So it is a tough question.
Yeah.
That I don't have
the
answer to. I just have my own story and experience, and
and
it is possible to make the best of that situation. But man, is it difficult for a teacher to make the best of that situation when they are going through their own significant struggles, not receiving any care, in an atmosphere of fear and punishment. Being made to drink from a fire hose, being asked to do more. It's tough to be in that experience and then still make the best of it.
Right.
And there's teachers that do all the time in every school, and it's what?
Yeah.
That's like a superhero level stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everyone's always dealing with something. I mean, that's one thing doing this podcast. Like, everyone is always dealing with something.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, when I go about life, whenever I start to get annoyed or frustrated, with someone, or I will nowadays try to check myself and say, okay, there's something going on that I just don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. They're dealing with something I don't know.
Yeah.
Unless I'm being a jerk to them. I'm just saying in general, if it's like, whoa, what? I usually just try to tell myself, there's something that I'm just unaware of. that they're just going through something. That's why the attitude's like that. That's why they're responding like that.
Yeah.
You know, because the more people I talk to, something is going on. I mean, no matter how good life is going for you, you're usually dealing with something that's difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about something that's, kind of the next level with how long you dealt with it. But it just reminds me of, you just never know, whether it's a kid, a student, a teacher, you never know what people are dealing with. My wife last night was, she was, man, I don't want to say too much, being supportive to someone at her work that really should be her leader.
Oh, sure.
And I just told her, I was like, it doesn't matter job titles. Everyone's struggling with things. It does, and good for Adrienne, because that's her heart. She loves the kids. She's usually trying to put smiles on people's faces. But I literally told her that last night when she was like, really, this conversation should have been the flip-flopped, like, this is my superior, and yet and I was like, it doesn't matter. The job title, it doesn't. They're dealing with stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone's dealing with stuff.
You're not alone.
It just a reminder of, like you talk about, the tenderness. If people could respond with that first, and then see where that conversation might have went.
Yeah.
That would be life-changing if that's all people would do. Just when they respond with something, I'm going to just start with tenderness.
Yeah.
And then maybe it'll change, but I'm going to start with this. I imagine a lot of conversations would go differently.
Oh, gosh.
A lot of scenarios would go differently.
Yeah.
And just, it's one thing I do a lot. I just constantly tell myself they're dealing with something. I just don't know what it is. So let me try to act accordingly.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll share. Maybe they'll be, feel comfortable to, this is what's really going on. Or, what you said about the principal, I liked how he handled that, because obviously he had to communicate, like, hey, you can't just keep, being late in here. But the way in which he did, was very kind.
Yeah. I learned a lot from him about being a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And leadership.
Yes. Yeah. Leadership is definitely something. Some of the people that I have had on here, they like focus on leadership. A buddy of mine who was just up here speaking in Washington, he just authored a book. I think you would love it. It's Social Emotional Learning Through Empathy. And the book is kind of his personal upbringing, which is quite something, and then all his years of administration, and kind of blending on how he connects with the kids through empathy, through what he also was raised in.
Sure.
So you're realizing at some point, I don't know if I can keep teaching. I don't know if I can keep giving all this.
Yeah.
Like, is that what that started to look like?
A sense of, oh man, I'm losing the fight. And I'm barely hanging on, and I wasn't hanging on before.
Yeah.
Things are bleaker, more hopeless, more desperate than ever before. And so I transitioned out of teaching, stopped teaching, and start doing real estate. But what really happened was a sense of oh man, I'm losing the fight, and this is going to be so hard on my girls, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I also many times during the Depression had a sense of, wow, my resilience is the stuff of legends. I'm not the most macho person or the toughest person or the most accomplished person, but this secret life. Wow, my resilience is unbelievable. There'd be times where another teacher would be a little rude to a student or something, and the teacher was having their own struggles, like we've been talking about, and probably very much believed that discipline, punishment, authoritativeness is their job. And the student would come into my room crying. And, oh man, what happened? And they'd tell me the story. This certain teacher wouldn't let me retake my exam. And he's insisting I have to get a 0 on it because I wasn't there. And I only missed it because a parent, I don't know how much I can share, a parent committed suicide the night before. And sobbing, the student is sobbing about their grade and probably about their parent. And I thought, boy, that teacher sure missed it, didn't they? There's a swing and a miss. They probably believe they're doing the right thing by being rigid, and this is policy, and you knew the class policy on day one of class. So you read the syllable. We went over it together. You signed it. You had your parents sign it. I can't remember how I got off on that little story actually, but I had this sense of I'm losing the fight, and said it was going to be hard on my daughters, and that there was nothing I could do about it, and my resilience. Oh, I remember what it was. So I thought, gosh, that teacher's probably struggling with something. These other teachers are probably struggling with something, but I would have the thought, but I bet they're not going to race home tonight and loop a belt around their neck and shut the other end of the belt in the door. It's not that effing hard to be kind.
Yeah.
It's not that effing hard to be kind.
Yeah.
And then if I go one step further, how much do they have to be hurting to not be able to get to kindness in the situation that obviously deserves kindness? Oh, wow. Man, whatever it is, if it's a long time wound or a fresh hurt, boy, that teacher has got to be hurting to not be able to give kindness in that situation.
Yep.
Gosh darn it. Can the teachers be allowed to catch their breath? Once or twice. So I, in 2015, I had the sense of I was nearing the end, and I started letting people in. And I'm not 100% sure why, but I told my wife more, told my dad, told my siblings more, told some teacher friends more. None of them had any idea. And then in January of 2015, I started seeing a therapist, and saw him like weekly for a while. And then started doing real estate as well. Still horrifically depressed. And so the next 3 years, 2015, 2018, I feel the same. But looking back, I see that letting people in and seeing a professional were setting up for healing, were the missing pieces for the relief. So I let these people in, see the therapist. And then in 2018, I have a very strong sense of being at the end. And I remember more than usual, I spent a lot of afternoons crying on the floor of my daughter's room because it was going to hurt them so bad when I ended things. And it was inevitable. It was unavoidable. I was racing towards that moment at this point. And the therapist, from day one, in our first interview, when he's saying, not sure if I'm taking new clients, let me interview you. And he's asking questions and making notes. And he says, I think you might have PTSD. And I thought, I can't have PTSD. I've never been in combat. Combat soldiers get PTSD. That's where you get it. I don't have PTSD, but that's interesting that you would say that. And 4-5 times a year for the following years, he would bring it up. And he'd say, here's a checklist of PTSD symptoms, and I've highlighted some of them, and see if you think, if that resonates with you. Mm-hmm. I'd be like, well, I don't have PTSD, but okay, whatever. He'd say, oh man, here's a TED Talk about trauma. I think you might get something out of this. Just constantly coming back to trauma and PTSD. And every time I would think, I've never been in combat. I've never even been in the military. I can't have PTSD. Mm-hmm. Does this guy even know what he's doing? So finally in 2018, I still feel the same. In crisis. I was in crisis and in survival mode almost every day for 24 years. It was so weird to look back on. Like the further away I get from that experience, the more I almost begin to question, that didn't really happen. That's not possible. What? So in the fall of 2018, the therapist says, hey, there's a book that I think would be useful to you. It's called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And I thought, that's a weird title. And he says it's about trauma. And I thought, well, I'm not going to read that. That's interesting. Thank you. Within that week, my sister messages me. And knowing nothing of the therapist, she says, I just came across a book I think it would be really useful to you. It's called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Kolk something. And I thought, fine, I'll get it. So I bought the book on Amazon. It's hard for me to spend money. Just my whole life, for a variety of reasons. Ordered the book, which was a huge step for me. It just sat on my desk. I'm not going to read it. I'm looking at something on YouTube. I can't remember what it was. It might have been trauma related. And somebody had illegally uploaded the audiobook for The Body Keeps the Score to YouTube. I'm sure they were not supposed to. 18 hours of The Body Keeps the Score, the audiobook, read by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And in my job, I spent a ton of time in my car, hours a day, appointments and showings and setting signs and viewing, listing appointments and whatever. I start listening to the book, and he's not talking about daydreaming, and he's not talking about depression, and I hear myself on almost every page. And that was a weird experience.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd had before, of hearing my experience or an insight into my experience that I wouldn't have come across on my own or I hadn't encountered before. And Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is one of, you can't really say the, number one greatest, most knowledgeable person on trauma, but one of the leaders in trauma research. And he's been researching it before it was a word with Vietnam vets back in the early 70s. He, was researching what is it that these guys are going through and why this behavior. And then for the next 80s, 90s, 40 years, anywhere on the planet that there was a therapy, a treatment, a medication, an outbreak, an interesting thing related to trauma, he was there, studying it, asking questions, recording, learning about it. And he finally writes a book. Hey, 40 years of the front lines of trauma research. Here's what I know. And his conclusion is the physical body keeps the score. Chronic illness, chronic pain, disease, depression, anxiety, ADHD, things related to food, anger, all these different behaviors, he says, are nothing except symptoms of trauma. They don't exist without trauma. They're not their own thing. They're just a symptom of trauma. So I'm listening to this guy talk about all this in a telling stories and talking about his insights. I don't even get all the way through the book when in November of 2018, I'm answering some questions for the therapist. And I'm handwriting, and I get into a flow. I love writing. And I love getting into a flow where the words pour out onto the page faster than you think, and you don't have to think and write. It just flows out, and not all of it's good. And it just is a neat experience for me.
Yeah.
I suppose flow with anything is a neat experience, whether you're a basketball player or a chef or an author, musician. So I get into a flow. Words are flowing out. It's kind of a profound, a deep experience, a meaningful experience. And all of a sudden I write, this is a Monday in November of 2018. I have always been terrified of my father. And I jerk back from the page. I thought, what? No. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. I love my dad. I respect my dad. I have a great relationship with my dad. He's done a lot of good for a lot of... Oh my gosh. That's the daydreaming. That's my sense of worthlessness. That's my sense of being unloved. That's my fear of authority. That's the depression. That's everything. What? I wouldn't believed it if someone had told me, hey, you have a deep terror of your primal fear of your father that goes back to before you have memories or thoughts. Wouldn't have believed him. Immediately rejected it. Even if they had given me evidence or stories, I would have said, nope. And I had this moment in a flow of writing where I wrote it, immediately said, no, impossible. And then for whatever reason, recognized it or it dawned on me or whatever. I was really struck by that. Actually, shook is a better word. Like a foundational thing of, wait, everything I know and believe and experience just got a little seismic shift. The next day was Tuesday, and I didn't normally see the therapist on Tuesday, and for some reason, and I was probably seeing him once every couple of months by that point. And I meet him, and he says, how's the month going? And I'm running through my 4 beliefs. So for 24 years, I've had 4 beliefs. I will always feel this way. One day this will kill me. I am worthless, and I am unlovable. And every day for 24 years, I saw dozens of evidence of those things. 20 at this point, I guess it's, 24 years of feeling depressed every day. It's reasonable to assume I'm going to feel this way forever. One day this will kill me. I won't be able to fight this forever. The fact that I fought it this long seems impossible. That I'm worthless. And I had this just deep sense of worthlessness. And throughout the day, like a great many experiences got filtered through that filter. And so the principal would come and say, hey, how's this project going? And he's just checking in on the project. But what I heard was, oh, you let him down. You always let people down. He's disappointed in you. You're not as far on the project as you should be. You're worthless. You've done this before. It'll happen again. And the depression really did make everything impossible. So I felt I was a failure at everything anyways. I felt I was good at loving people and an absolute failure at everything else. So, and then in my head, over the course of the 24 years, that thought just kind of evolved fairly quickly, fairly early in the depression into the belief I had was there are trillions of egg-sperm combinations that never happen. I was supposed to be one of those, and my depression is the universe trying to correct that mistake. So I really believed, I deeply believed, 100% convinced I was not supposed to exist. And the depression was the remedy, and the universe was waiting for me to end things, and that all these little experiences throughout the day that I took as evidence of my worthlessness was just, oh yeah, I already knew that. worthless. Not even supposed to be here, so obviously I'm not going to be doing a good job at that. Mm-hmm. And then I believed that I was unlovable. And the reasoning my brain came up with was, if I was lovable, somebody would love me enough that I felt it. Mm. I didn't feel love from anybody. Therefore, I'm unlovable. And it'll be easier on humanity and those around me when I'm gone. It'll be a favor to them, a gift to them, even though I knew it would hurt my daughters. So I had those 4 beliefs every day, constant, truer than gravity to me for 24 years. So in this Tuesday session, I'm running through that month and kind of covering those 4 things. I'll always feel this way, and this and this and this. One day this will kill me, and yeah, I do feel closer than I have before. And actually, here's the things I did this week where I came pretty darn close, and the frequency of those seems to be increasing. I let these people down, and I know it because of this behavior of theirs, and yeah, I'm unloved and rejected by all these different people because this happened, and the therapist says, "Hey, can I interrupt for a second? I hate to interrupt, but can I jump in? Would you say those things to anybody else? Those 4 things you've been sharing?" And I was so struck, I couldn't speak. And in my head, I'm screaming, "No. There is nobody on the planet that I would say, you're worthless. You're unlovable. You shouldn't exist. When you feel bad, you'll always feel that way." There's nobody. It was an easy question to answer. No one on the planet I would say those things to. And I instantly caught what was behind the question. If it's not true for any of the other 7 billion people on the planet, there's just no way it's true for me. And that was a huge, well, no, I know these things are true. Those 4 things are the truest things in the universe to me. But now logically, those beliefs have been absolutely obliterated. And I was reeling from that thought. Well, they have to be, but they can't be. They have to be true, but they can't. It's impossible for them to be true. Well, what does this mean? The next day was a Wednesday, and my wife and I are in the evening folding towels or doing something like that. And all of a sudden she says, I was thinking today, I don't know anyone that could have done what you've done. And I instantly think, oh, shoot, what did I do? Okay, brace yourself for criticism, brace yourself for some judgment, put on a smile, maybe drift off into a happier fantasy world where things are really great. And she continues and says, I was thinking today, I don't know anyone, oh man, that could have carried the burden you've carried all these years and been so kind and been such a good father and been so giving. And the physical experience was I felt something melting in my chest. And I thought, I didn't know you noticed that. I didn't know you thought that way. I didn't know anyone thought that way or anyone noticed it. It was just a lightning bolt through the heart. And again, my brain began to whisper, or tried to whisper, if she sees it, other people have seen it. If it's true for her, it's true for others. And then the next day was Thursday, and I had to finish up these questions for the therapist, and one of them was about memories, some childhood memories, and I just don't have very many. So there's one that's very vivid and that I know is a memory, and it's of a rather unpleasant experience. And so I was writing about this unpleasant experience that was happening to one of my siblings, and it has always bothered me. And I'd talk with them about it. I'd talk with their parents about it over the years, dozens of times. I've talked with my brother dozens of times and talked with parents 3 or 4 times. 3 times, I suppose. And I'm writing about it because it's my one memory, and I'm trying to be super detailed and capture what I'm seeing and feeling and get into a flow of writing. writing this experience, this memory. And all of a sudden, before I think it, I write, it is only now at age 48 that I realize what an impact this had on me. And again, I leaned back from the computer and I thought, what? No, this bothers me because I'm bothered for my sibling. I care about my sibling. Oh man. That's what the trauma dude is talking about. Next day is Friday. I'm going through the day and realize something is weird. And I stop for a second and go, what is going? Oh, there's no depression. And it was confusing. It's such a, it was new to me. It was just this weird experience of, oh, that thing is gone or different. And I remember physically looking around because I knew it was there. I'd had good days in the past, but the depression was always there. And this was like poof, like it never existed. Like Disney fairy tale or Hallmark movie, just poof. And I remember looking around and thinking, this is unusual. And a month goes by, I didn't tell anybody because I didn't believe it. And finally, after a month, I messaged my brother and sister and said, here's a little more of my story. They didn't know all the details. I said, but it's been a month of zero depression. I don't know what's going on, and it's weird. And they immediately messaged back, oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you. So sorry that you struggled so much and for so long. Rooting for you, love you, here for you. Probably 3 or 4 months, 3 months, more months go by. And I'm out with some friends, teacher friends. They just start a conversation with, how you doing? It's a pretty common way to start a conversation. And the response is supposed to be good. Fine. Okay. Chilling. Whatever. Yeah. And I said, better than ever before in my life. And they said, what? Oh, that's good. Yeah. Tell me more about that. Yeah. And so I told them a little bit of the story. They didn't know. They are wiping away tears and hanging on me and saying, we had no idea. We've known you 10 years and had no idea. Then I think at the 7-month mark, I told some more people. It is now closing in on 4 years of zero depression. Zero depression for 4 years. But that first year after the depression left, so all of 2019, I was a mess. I had never met Grant Huhn. 49 years old and had never met Grant Huhn. I didn't know what my interests were. I didn't know what my hobbies were. I didn't know if I was a nice guy or if that was a way to keep people from knowing what was going on inside. I didn't know if I was really a funny person or if that was just kind of a hyper response to keep people from knowing what was going on inside. Completely lost. I had no idea who I was. I felt a bit hopeless, like I'm starting at zero at age 49. All my peers are well into their careers. They have their hobbies. They golf. They have their ski boat. They play guitar. They do whatever. They're talking retirement. I don't do any of that. All I've done is fight for my life and hide that fight full time. I felt mad for a little while, mad at the depression. Like, you don't get to just disappear. I fought you tooth and nail in a brutal battle for 24 years. You don't get to waltz off. Where are you?
Yeah.
Because you took a lot from me.
Yeah.
Also in that year, I had 2 bouts of a couple months each where I had hand-shaking anger at my dad. You effing stole 48 years of my life. You didn't mean to. Wasn't planned. No intention. Probably thought he was doing quite the opposite. Thought he was doing what dads are supposed to do. I would imagine. Doing the best he could is accurate for every human being on the planet and accurate for him. But the reality was, he inadvertently, because of his behavior and mistakes, and my personality and the detaching from reality, he ended up stealing. That was the feeling was, you took the first 48 years of my life, and that's a lot to take from somebody. So angry.
Have you talked with him? Was that ever a conversation?
Yeah, a little bit. Little bit. So for a year, I'm trying to do real estate and serve people, and I'm a mess. And then December of 2019, I'm just going through my day, thinking it's going to be like the previous year's worth of days, and again I have a sense of something's different, something's really weird, and I pause and try to figure out what's going on, and I realized that I felt peace inside for the first time in my life. 49 years old, 50 years old at that point, and had never felt that ever for a moment in my life. And I instantly knew what it was, even though I'd never felt it. Calm. No tension, no restlessness, no sense of being lost, no hopelessness. And I was weepy for the next 3 months with tears of joy, tears of relief. And I'd be on the phone with a client. So do you know if your financing is conventional or FH? Just tears. FHA. I'd be showing a house, and they'd say, "Hey, does this have a formal dining room or just joy and relief, tears?" For about 3 months. That was 2020. Then in March of 2020, I think I'd mentioned I had told a little bit of my story. And that was a long time coming. I had this really growing sense of urgency. I have to tell my story. Every day that I don't tell my story, someone is suffering more than they need to suffer. And I couldn't do it because I was so ashamed of it. Deeply ashamed of the depression, the 24 years I was in it. And the thought of, if someone knew what was going on, I was certain they would say, "Okay, this guy's a little messed up. Yeah, we'll just distance ourselves from him."
Right.
And I think, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I think at some deep primal level, that rejection would have been too painful or too much. So unconscious level, it might have been a fear of rejection. I think that is a very, 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 very common story. Not even aware of what that deep fear is, what that deepest root is, and it is affecting all kinds of behavior, behavior from there.
Yep.
So I was deeply ashamed of my story. I was deeply ashamed that I was depressed. I was deeply ashamed of how I stayed alive. I was certain I was worthless. And so I was fighting those things and against this sense of, I have to tell my story. So I talked with my wife and the therapist a lot, and they said, "Yeah, I think it would be healthy for you to tell the story. And then, if it helps other people, which it will, that'll be great." So I finally told a little bit of my story, wrote a couple of paragraphs on Facebook in March of 2020 without too many details. And have been overwhelmed by how many people have messaged me privately. I think 55 at this point in 2.5 years to say, "That's my story. That's my child's story." And it reminds me of a quote I love that says, "What is most private is most universal." And we think, gosh, if I tell them my story of my depression, I'm going to be rejected. And the reality is, if I tell my story of my depression, all hands are going to go up in the room. And it reminded me that when I was teaching, there was 2 times where I accidentally alluded to it. I'm guessing it was too much that day or something, or I sensed it was in the students. It's probably more likely. And somehow it came up in the course of what we were talking about, maybe Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo's great deal of angst, a great deal of teenage confusion and frustration and perhaps depression. And so I mentioned, I've struggled with depression, some little thing like that. The bell rings. Students have 5 minutes. They got to rush to their class. And instead of rushing to their class, a line forms at my desk. Mr. Huhn, that's me. Mr. Huhn, that's me. Mr. Huhn, this week's been really hard. Mr. Huhn, I would never guess you wrestled with that. I always use past tense, like it was something that had been gone. And I would think, I have a vague memory of thinking, oh man, what are we doing? This is what they need.
Yeah.
This is what they need. So, share a little bit of the story in March 2020, and people start contacting me out of the blue. And then a couple months after that, I thought I need to go on a podcast. And so I searched for local podcasts in 2020, and there was one called 10 Bestest. So I contacted those guys and said, can I come on your podcast and tell my story? And they said, have you listened to our podcast? And I said, no. And they said, okay, that's not what our podcast is about at all. But let's do it. Let's figure out how we can make this work and still fit our podcast.
Yeah.
And so we did. We made it work for their format, which is really cool and simple and structured, and they do a marvelous job. So I did a little podcast here in town in 2020, and about 2 months after it airs, I get a message on Facebook, and someone says, you don't know me, we've never met, I live states away. And I went out for my morning walk this morning, or went out for a walk this morning, and my phone podcast app, I thought I'd listen to a podcast. It recommended some random podcast I've never heard of out of some city I've never been to. And it recommended some random episode. And the person says, I wasn't able to finish the walk. It was from sobbing. It was the first time I'd ever heard anyone tell my story. And so had lots of conversations with that person. And then this year, in January of this year, was just going through my day one day and suddenly had the thought of, out of the blue, I'm going to be all right. I think I'm going to make it. And I'd never had that thought in my life. 52 years old now at that point, and had never had that thought.
Wow.
I'm going to make it. And so I began to think, okay, if I'm going to make it, which I believe I'm going to, what do I do this year? And so I determined in January of this year to work on forgiveness. And 10 months later, I am still working on forgiveness. And it's been interesting and beautiful and difficult. And I know I'm getting closer. I can feel I'm getting closer. I can see I'm getting closer. And I'm not all the way there yet, though. But that is kind of the story of birth to age 53 now.
How, when you were talking about feeling unloved, unlovable, but you were married, you've been married for 20 plus years. How did your wife take that?
Confused. I love you.
Yeah.
I've demonstrated love.
Yeah.
This time. She didn't understand it. I think a great many married people feel unloved, numbers wise, maybe percentage wise. A great many of them feel unloved, feel neglected, overlooked, men and women. I think a great many men, in fact, that's something that, those first 10 people that contacted me, several of the men talked about feeling lonely. A profound loneliness, lying in bed at night next to their spouse and feeling profoundly lonely. They talked about not being understood, which I didn't, I could relate to, but I didn't understand how powerful that was. But trying to understand someone else, or seeking to understand someone else, or being open to understand someone else is pretty rare. And what a gift that is, to even just try to understand someone else. Like Abraham Lincoln had that quote of, "I don't like that man. I'll have to get to know him better." Trying to understand.
I was having lunch a few weeks ago with a buddy of mine that's been on here. And we hadn't seen each other since then, since the podcast. But we were just talking about the podcast and it growing and this, that, the other thing. And there was, I forget exactly how it came up, but it was either me saying, I'm sure there's going to be some people I don't really want to have on the podcast, or him. I don't know. Something got brought up about that. And I want to say I referenced, not a name, but just like, oh yeah, there's a few people out there that I don't really want to do it. And he was like, and that's why you should do it. That's why you should have them on there. If you're feeling like you don't want to, you should. You might get a different perspective of that person. Which I was like, yeah, you're right. Like if I just only have people on that I see eye to eye with, or we kind of have common ground, or they're similar to me, over time, how interesting is that? How about maybe some people I wouldn't typically lend myself to, hey, let's go spend a couple hours together and let me ask all about you. And so it made me, that quote made me think of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, me being married, I've just, like a lot of times I'll put myself in these scenarios when people are talking and I'm like, what would that be like with me and Adrian? If I was to communicate to her that I never really feel loved or lovable, I wonder how she would interpret that. I wonder how she, like you're saying, well, I did this and this. I mean, clearly I can build you a list of how I'm showing my love for you. My thought would be that would be very difficult for someone that's attempting to love you and show you, and you're unable to receive that or feel that.
Yeah.
And how she dealt with that and stayed in a marriage. If someone was like, yeah, I know you're doing these things, but I don't feel it. I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
It seems like that would be very difficult to, I'm going to keep doing it anyways. And
and I think she thought things were good, because I would have every now and then where it was obviously bad. But otherwise I'd bounce back to the really funny, really kind guy that everybody loves.
Okay.
And she'd go, oh, there he is.
Okay.
And then she found out, oh, that's, at least part of that was a mask. And part of it was genuine. That's been something this year at age 53, almost 4 years out of the depression, that I've been wrestling with and beginning to understand more that, resilience, the kindness, the interest in other people, the empathy, those things have stuck around. And they were there so constantly and in such measure that they probably were they're probably legit. Because I worried in 2019 when I didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
I worried, have I been faking empathy? Have I been faking kindness so that people would like me? I didn't know who I was. I'd never met myself before. So my wife has said, kind of half jokingly, that, the big difficulty for her is when I came out of depression, when I started saying no. Because she hadn't experienced that before.
Yeah.
I started standing up for myself, or saying, I don't want that, or don't want to do that, or whatever. That was new to her, and half seriously, she said, that was a little bit of a challenge. Almost like a different person than I married. Than she married.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that.
Yeah. And still working on that. Still working on saying no, standing up for myself, and doing that well instead of clumsily or awkwardly or going overboard with it.
Yeah.
Because I'm new at it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a great many people who are people pleasers.
Yeah.
Who say yes because of some deep unmet needs. And that's great to be kind and sweet and giving. And then the problem is that resentment can happen, bitterness can happen, burnout can happen. I feel like some of the earlier guests had even talked about that people pleasing and burnout and resentment. Maybe Danny and is it Joel?
Oh yeah, and Joel. Yeah.
I feel like that was fun. That was a super cool episode as well.
Yeah, theirs is like when we were talking earlier, and I said I kind of had an idea of what I thought this would be when I started it. I always say that theirs is the episode that really I was like, whoa, I don't think that this is going to be what I thought it was going to be. It was really their episode that made me think like, oh, wow, I think this is going to be more the personal story than just how'd you start your business and tell me about your business. I mean, we talked about the business, and honestly, I didn't know their business model. So that was like real time me struggling to ask questions because like I know what a home builder is. I can ask a million questions for that, but I didn't know their business model in the healthcare industry. So I was trying to figure it out as we were talking. But that's the one that, because I think they were the second one I ever recorded. Because I haven't put all these out, haven't been when I actually record them. Some have been, I recorded that, you now, but I'm putting you out sooner than someone. So, but I think they were the second one I ever did. And that was what really started, like, I think this is going to be different than I originally thought. And they were just vulnerable and, sounds like they got, great feedback and response from people. I've had another guy on here who told me that, like you're talking about people reaching out to you and being like, oh, that's my story. Another guy that was on here that said that, someone reached out after the episode, and sounds like just they would have been very unlikely of friends, but now because that person felt so connected through his story, now they like walk their dogs together and they're buds, but because of that storytelling, that they really were able to connect, and that's a big part of why I'm doing all this, is to spread stories out there and relatability and people understanding I'm not the only one. I mean, I have no idea where all of this will go as time goes on. But I'd have to imagine there's going to be some great stories and of, man, that really helped me. I needed to hear that at that particular time. I mean, I've already heard some of it, but I look forward to more of those, like you're saying, like that was my story.
That's my story. Or I think that's my child's story, which is maybe even more painful.
Yeah. I think the more storytelling, the more understanding, you realize like, wow, we're a lot more similar than we are different as people. wow, we struggle and go through a lot of more similar things than we would think we do.
Yeah.
Or how I'm feeling, wow, there's a lot of people that feel that way. I thought I was the only one. That's something that I'm really trying to bring to this is if you're willing to listen to these, and you might not even know the people, but you'll find this like, wow, this is like me. And I don't even know this person, like there's more people out. So that's a big layer to the podcast of what I'm trying to
You're not alone.
Do.
And that idea of maybe of what is most private is most universal.
I have never heard that. I feel like every time someone's on here, I hear something I've never heard, and that will stick with me because I believe that.
Yeah.
As I really think about what that means. Yeah. I mean, maybe that goes hand in hand. That's why it is so private. So many people deal with it, yet they feel like they're the only ones, or they're the only shameful, or Well, I appreciate you sharing your story.
Mm-hmm.
I have not heard a story like that, of that kind of duration. I haven't really heard the daydreaming to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I think about daydreaming, I really had to think about what you were saying, because I feel like we all kind of daydream here and there, but it's like, oh, I lost my 15 minutes. Now I'm back. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for you to continue to share your story because, I mean, like all the people that have reached out to you already, there's, a lot of that stuff I can't personally relate with, but I would have to imagine there's a lot that would. That'll be powerful.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that a high percentage of them have said, like, their main question or interest is, how did it end? What's the answer? What's the solution? And I said, well, I just know my story. And I believe in my story there's probably some significant answers.
Yeah.
I would say if I had to sum up, if it was useful for someone to hear what I believed.
I was waiting for that part, honestly. Yeah. I was waiting to, okay, I think you're out of that now. Yeah. Like, I think that's part of your story. And I was waiting, what were those pivotal moments that, I think we might be onto something here.
Letting people in was a huge one. And the second biggest one was just beginning to understand trauma. Not fully understanding it, but just beginning to understand trauma, which I didn't know. And then those two things led me to that moment of childhood was difficult, and that affected me. Yeah. I never said those two things to myself before. I never acknowledged those two things, both those things together. But trauma, it's really cool that we're starting to understand trauma. Like, humanity is really starting to understand trauma, and it's been really recently that we're understanding it, and even more recently that the message is starting to spread.
Yeah.
But as far as we know, trauma is loss of connection with your authentic self. It's not the event that happened to you. It's if your response to that event is losing connection with yourself. My brother and sister did not lose connection with reality. I did. And when you lose connection with yourself, that's trauma. And then you will, guaranteed, experience addiction or anxiety or depression or food-related things or ADHD or several trauma researchers feel that Lou Gehrig's disease is only a symptom of trauma. And chronic illness, chronic pain, on and on and on. There's a number, I think the three most well-known books on trauma all separately have come to that conclusion that all these things are symptoms of trauma and that trauma affects the physical body. Dr. Gabor Mate is another one of the leading trauma dudes, and his early main book on trauma was entitled When the Body Says No. But trauma is that loss of connection with yourself. So like a little girl could be born into an angry home, and so she plays, before she even thinks it, she begins to play the role of the good little girl. Do what you're told, be quiet, be permissive, be obedient, and avoid being a target of the anger. And the rest of her life, she will play the role of the obedient little girl, and that's never who she was. She will guaranteed experience anxiety or addiction or depression or ADHD and on and on and on. Or a boy could be born into a stressful home and become a class clown.
Mm-hmm.
Disruptive and class clown. If I can make dad laugh, maybe I won't get beaten. The rest of his life, he plays the class clown, and then at age 25, crashes and burns because that's never who it was. It's the loss of connection. I mean, another example that might be useful is soldiers could see combat, and 3 of those soldiers are fine, and 2 of them homeless and addiction, which is a pretty common story with our veterans.
Yeah.
And it happens not because of the combat, not because of the event, but it happens when they lose connection with reality or with their true self. When they begin to say, that didn't happen. I didn't do those things. That couldn't have happened. I couldn't have done those things. I don't acknowledge that I shot those people, whatever the case might be. And it's that response to the terrible event causes loss of connection with yourself, and that's what trauma is. And then trauma will cause all these host of other things. That understanding of trauma, just beginning to understand it, was a huge thing for me. That set me up for relief. And then the relief was strange, just poof. One day, I mean, that's how the story is told and how it sounds. I brought this little prop with me you probably saw.
Uh-huh.
And this is closing in on 8 years worth of notes from therapy sessions. The first one is January 19, 2015. And the last one is August 11th, 2022.
Wow.
And so, I tell the story, my depression went poof, but the notebook says there was a therapist.
It was a process.
It was a process, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of reading, a lot of sessions, a lot of studying, a lot of writing, a lot of reflecting, a lot of trying these things that he suggested I do, reading these things, watching these things. It was a lot of work, which is exciting on one hand, that relief is possible. There is hope. And I think it can be a little daunting on another hand.
Yeah.
Because people say, I'm so miserable, I need help.
Right.
I need someone to throw a life ring because I'm not going to swim. I'm not going to make it to shore if I have to swim. I need a pill that's going to fix it. And hopefully the medication would for many people. A lot of people, medication's super effective for if they take it regularly.
Right.
I need something to help me. And my story was this, the experience of some instant relief, but also just a lot of work. And even when I didn't feel any different.
Have you thought about, I've said this to multiple guests, have you thought about starting a podcast on like trauma?
Kind of. I mean, once or twice that thoughts crossed my mind of I need to share what the little that I've learned. How could I share it?
Do you enjoy sharing that?
Yes. Love it. Super meaningful. More meaningful than my day job.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about like, especially with like your teacher side as well, you being able to craft things to present information. But I would see you doing something, you've lived it, you know what it feels like. Like, so when people would reach out to you or like you literally could say, I know what that feels like, here's maybe the next step. Cause like you said, and I dealt not to anywhere to your extent, but I dealt with depression for a little while. And when you brought up the impossible task or whatever it was, that's so true. Cause I remember back then feeling like anything I thought, going to the post office, like everything just felt impossible. I can't do that today.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
With you knowing how that feels to help, like, well, take this step, like here's, and even like if I'm hearing it from you, knowing that this is what you've been through, I feel like I probably would have even listened more intently to you rather than the next guy, because man, this guy's been through it. He battled it. Here's some of the steps he took. I might as well try this because whatever I'm doing is not working. I could definitely see, and it sounds like you really enjoy it too. You being in a space of talking about your experience, which is, I'd have to imagine, helpful in and of itself, sharing your experience, but then helping others along the way with actual, here's the steps I did. And maybe not everyone that works for, but I would have to imagine there's people out there that would, love to hit, like, what are those literal steps that you did, and with letting people in and therapy, and I would have to imagine that would be very helpful. I mean, really think about people that are dealing with it now.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about it now. For me, I'm not dealing with it, but thinking about the people that would listen that are dealing with it now.
This week, 3 former students have messaged me out of the blue, from 10 to 15 years ago, or whenever. 3 former students.
Yeah.
Hey, do you remember me? I'm struggling. Well, of course I remember you. I'm so sorry to hear that you're struggling. Would you be up for talking about it? Yeah. So many people struggle, and so many people struggle in silence, I think, or in secret. And yeah, like I had mentioned, my story seems so weird to me the further away I get from it. Because I was certain, 100% certain of how it was going to end. And then it did not end that way. And it didn't end that way not because of anything I did, at least directly, but what seemed to be some chance things, or some slow building things.
Even that piece of your story, like, you were so certain for so long that this is how it's going to end. There's people right now feeling that way. But then now you're sitting here saying, but it didn't. So I know exactly how you feel, because I felt that way too, but then it didn't. I mean, a lot of people don't know what that feels like. I mean,
and wouldn't believe it.
Yeah. But here's someone that I, for so long, knew how this thing was going to end, but it didn't. Yeah.
It's just so strange. The fact, it all seems so weird to me. The getting lost in daydreaming, the depression coming on, the depression being so severe, the way it left, it all seems so weird, by chance. It all just seems like chance, is one way to look at it. I had some dear friends and who I've talked with about it a lot, and one of them had a saying they came up with from their own experience, and they said, it had to happen, and it had to happen exactly the way it did. And they shared that with me in a real compassionate way, and I rejected it in my head. Like, no, my story, this loss of 49 years, that didn't have to happen. And now, a year and a half later, from when I first heard them say that, it's starting to sink in. Oh, okay. I'm not there yet, but I could see me getting to a place where I say, oh yeah, it had to happen.
Yeah.
And it had to happen exactly the way it did.
Yeah.
And
that's one part of my story that I have struggled in terms of my career. I bounced around a lot, and my friends that are kind of in my circle, if you will, they're all, I'm 40, so I'm like in, right around that 48, 41, 42, whatever, my buddies. But they're all kind of like at the top of their industries now. And I'm beginning some stuff right now. And that's definitely something that a mental hurdle that I have really, it's bogged me down, in terms of like I had all this potential and, like in my college group, teammates, roommates, buddies, I was kind of known like as a guy, like, man, if he would have been the hardest worker, he probably would be a Division I guy, potentially an NBA guy. But Trav just didn't work as hard as he could have, but had all this potential. And I have struggled for many years feeling like, career-wise, like, why am I not finding my thing? Why is nothing really taking off for me? And I've said this a few times on the podcast that I finally feel like, okay, I think I found my thing. And then I asked, like, why'd this take so long? and the more conversations I'm having, the more it's being revealed of, well, I couldn't have done this when I was 30. I couldn't have done it when I was 25. I couldn't have done it when I was 35. All the things I've been through, even with you, like, yeah, I have experienced depression. Not to that extent, but I have experienced it where I was medicated and I felt like things were impossible and I had no job and no direction, like, and, you know, some light suicidal thoughts. And so I'm looking at like what I'm trying to do, where I'm going to talk to all these different people, and you know, I've made lots of money, I've made no money, I've everything in between, and now I'm seeing, okay, a lot of those things that I went through, it's going to help me relate to people that I interview and talk with, and say, I know what that's like. I've experienced that. So it's my own personal journey. I now look at this that I'm growing to love, and I see where it's going. And I'd always thought, what is taking so long? And now I'm like, okay, I couldn't have had these conversations. I couldn't have went this deep. I couldn't have done this before now. But it's like only in time do those things get revealed. I mean, I wanted to know this years ago, and now it's slowly starting to, okay, I'm starting to see why I've been frustrated for so long. Like, why is that guy and that and that and that, but I'm not.
Yeah. That's a common story.
Yeah.
Super common story.
Yeah.
There's going to be somebody, lots of people listening to those last 5 minutes and going, oh my gosh, that's my story.
Yeah. I mean, that'll be a huge part of my journey with all of this stuff. And wherever this goes, of it's never too late. And man, I was 40 years old when I felt like I just started to scratch the surface of like, I think this is my thing. You know, you're 50 years old feeling like, I think I'm going to be okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is unbelievable to me. Like, as I'm sitting listening to that thinking, wow, 50 and you're, I think I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, that was weird. This past January, then that all of a sudden had that thought out of the blue of, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to make it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I didn't know what that felt like, or hadn't had that thought before.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty exciting thought. A pretty liberating thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I had, in 2019, when I was trying to sort things out, and that year that was a mess, I did a lot of writing. I was writing my story to try and get it all out. And I ended up writing about 200 pages. And I titled it Out of Darkness and Danger. Just came to me as I was writing. And then at the beginning of this year, that moment of I'm going to be okay, was really a sense of being out of danger.
Yeah.
I was in danger for a long time, or in darkness a long time, and suddenly out of it. And oh man, there's folks right now that are in it.
Yeah.
And they're not alone, and there's hope. There's folks that are struggling to find and feeling frustration about finding what they're supposed to do.
Right. Right. What's my purpose, my
what's
mission,
my
my
vocation, career, whatever, my interests.
Yep.
There's people who are struggling with depression or anxiety, struggling as parents or whatever,
Yep.
physical ailments. And that message of you're not alone and there's hope is so powerful. I remember, when I was in the depression, more times than I can count, hundreds of times, I'd be driving along and I'd pass those little yard signs, don't give up. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
Yep.
And teary-eyed, I'd circle the block and park in front of the house and think, I have to go up and tell this person that thank you, because that is going to get me through the afternoon. And then at the time I was too ashamed and never did. But so many times a yard sign kept me going.
Wow.
That message of you're not alone.
Yeah.
And there is hope, even when you feel like you're alone and you feel like there's no hope.
Yeah.
Especially in those times.
I see you this like what I pictured this year for you, like with this thought of I'm going to be okay. I picture the next thought of like, so now what? Like, I feel like there's so many things that you're thinking. So now what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do with all this?
Yeah. So I made a video about leadership earlier, a little bit ago. So I was really happy with, and it took about a year to write it all. And I filmed it a couple times and didn't like the first couple takes. And then I've been working on one on forgiveness. I've been writing all this thing about forgiveness. And then lately, like the last 3 weeks, as I felt more healthy, more whole, more healed, that's a very accurate word. I've had this sense of, I want to be worthy of the pain. And that's a little bit scary because it suggests something big. Mm-hmm. But at least in terms of character, even if it's not a huge accomplishment, in terms of character and moment by moment decisions, I want to be worthy of those 48, 49 years of darkness and danger.
Yeah.
So that's, equally exciting and a little scary, that thought. But it's kind of a cool thought. I wouldn't have had that before.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think your girls will respond after listening or watching this?
Yeah, I'll have to tell them that I did it and I've shared details they haven't heard before. I think they will do amazing with it. They're super compassionate people. And they're pretty darn wise. And they're fun. So I think they will respond with tenderness, and I think it will deepen their empathy and deepen their wisdom and affect the way they interact with people or respond. Affect the way they respond to people even more. Because they're both pretty good, I would say above average for any age, at recognizing there's something behind that behavior. Which not a lot of humans can do because of their own unmet needs.
Right.
Just never got there.
Right.
Haven't got there yet. But the girls are pretty good at recognizing, there's something. That person got angry. That person was rude. That person made a stupid decision. There's probably something behind that.
Yeah.
So I think this will further strengthen that thing.
Good.
I worried for 4 years now. I've worried that if more details of my story were public, that the girlies might feel some embarrassment. Like someone might go, "Oh gosh, man, your dad was messed up.
Yeah,
boy, your dad was really a loony," or whatever. Or how embarrassing that must be to have your dad doing those things. But
I feel like, well, you talked about it a little bit. This, and Jason Conrad, who has the basketball team, he talked a lot about mental health. It just seems like the conversation of mental health is so much more on the forefront than it used to be, and so much more acceptable that it's happening and we're talking about it. And it's not this crazy stigma. And it does seem like that is being advanced in a good way,
Oh gosh,
a forward way.
And
like
fairly recent, too.
Yes. Like with your daughters, like I feel like people would rather than, oh man, your dad, it might be, man, my uncle. Oh man, my mom.
Oh yeah.
Like, people being like,
And the girls have had the experience of a former student chasing me down to say thank you. Do you remember me? Favorite teacher, one of the favorite teachers, huge impact. They've been witness to that enough times that they probably go, can temper that or weigh that against, hey, this guy was struggling.
Gotcha.
This guy made mistakes. This guy was struggling, and yet we're not ashamed of him.
Yeah.
We've seen, just this weekend was family weekend at U of O. One of my daughters goes to U of O. One of them goes to OSU. And there's 60,000 people at Autzen. It's the fourth largest crowd ever. And it's so packed you just can hardly...
against Chip in
Yeah.
UCLA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can hardly move.
That
And
makes
some
sense.
dude is yelling and chases us down, fights his way through the crowd. A former student to say, hey, do you remember me? And my wife and girls were there and said, you were just an amazing human being and an amazing teacher.
That's awesome.
And the those secret 30-year standards, I'm going to light up when this kid walks in the room. I'm going to point out one of his strengths. That's pretty simple. You don't need a doctorate degree or a lot of accomplishment to do that. I didn't feel like I was being an amazing person. I felt like I just came upon these things that might have been birthed from my own pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then people chased me down to say, thank you so much. You're such an amazing person. But I was just being nice.
Man, I think about that like if that was actually curriculum that teachers had to teach, if they had to do that, if every teacher
point out strength.
Yeah, if they had to do those things, because I'm married to an educator. Like I know there's teachers out there trying to do different things like that.
Yeah.
But and have that perspective, but I know they don't all have that perspective, or they're struggling with their own stuff, so it's hard for them to execute that. But those things like that you're saying, you're right. Like I started thinking, what do I remember from English class? Right?
High school English.
It's like I don't know. I don't know what I could say about that other than a teacher. Like I remember that teacher, and how I felt. Yeah, that's and
human beings innocently are very much wrapped up in punishment, tragically and innocently. And so teachers, parents, supervisors, human beings are really, really hung up on punishment, and that it's the parent's job, it's the teacher's job, it's super important. And the reality is punishment is worthless. And I was just fortunate to understand that pretty early on through encountering a book by chance and encountering another book and encountering this idea and observing and from a depth that other people weren't observing from, or a place that other people weren't observing from. And so I just removed punishment from the equation, and that was novel. I think that was a little piece too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I've heard you've saved my life. You saved my child's life.
Well, I saw a comment on Facebook that referenced that. Yeah.
Yeah. And hear that every now and then. and I was just functioning differently than most people function, but it was just being nice.
I was just thinking, I don't think most people have heard someone communicate to them that might have saved my life. That's got to be an interesting feeling for you. I've never had anyone say that anything that I did might have saved their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
And you've heard it more than once.
Yeah. And the times that I've heard it, a couple of them were when I was in the depths of depression. And my thought was, I'm so happy you feel saved. I'm worthless. I shouldn't even be here, but so happy I was able to give you something. Since coming out of the depression and hearing it, is really satisfying or really rewarding, deeply rewarding, and then kind of tinged or stained with a sense of urgency of I've got to throw more effing life rings. I got to throw more effing life rings. I didn't throw any today, metaphorically.
Yeah.
I didn't tell my story. So that is there's a little tension there.
Yeah.
With that, I don't even know how to tell my story more, or what that means.
Well, that's why I brought up the podcast thing. If you had an outlet, a vehicle in which you could do it more frequently, like, I don't know if that is something for you, like internally, that you would feel like, hey, I can do this. I mean, once you get set up with whatever that looks like, because honestly, it's a lot easier if you're just one person doing this stuff than multiple people. There's certain microphones that literally just plug into your computer, and it's a lot easier. But I was just thinking, like, that could be a way, the frequency that might, for you, be able to scratch that itch, if you will, if that was an itch of, well, I want to do this more frequent. I want to talk about this more frequent. And I just, because I've been in this space, thought, well, I mean, you could do it as frequent as you would want to.
Oh man. I think about sharing every single day. Think about sharing something crosses my mind multiple times a day, and I think, oh gosh, I need to share this. And then rarely do I ever share it. This year I've been doing a photo a day thing. And the reason I did that was to force myself to share things, because and to force myself to be a little more present and aware of, that's in this moment, this view, this image is worth remembering, to be a little more present.
Well, and you documented so well your journey. Like, some of my ideas, like for you, is like you could go in and, like, under the 2017 tab, on this day in this year, this is how I was feeling, or this is how I dealt with it. Or, I mean, because you've documented it so well, this part of the journey of, and I don't know if you would go in chronological order, or it would just be this thing, this day, this is where I was at, this is what I was thinking about. I look at it like, man, you got so much stuff that you'd be able to post something all the time.
Sure.
With how long, that this has been. And
and I write every day. I write, and rarely, if ever, share it, and feel some angst or frustration or confusion about that.
Yeah.
And frustration that I don't have enough time.
Yeah.
Because I'll write something, and I think, like, for a little while, I've thought, it sounds so crazy to say, but I've thought, I think I could save humanity. As I've identified the 4 biggest problems that humans make, and folks don't know it. They're not aware of these things, at least most folks. And I think I understand, what we could do to avoid those problems, those mistakes. And then also on individual levels, just sharing my story,
Yeah.
or inviting people to share theirs with
Yeah.
me privately.
Yeah. Do you follow Jacob Espinoza?
Yeah, I do.
So he has his Leader Lens, his newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
And then does videos a lot. He works for the Salem Chamber of Commerce, but he's pushing out a lot of very focused on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
He just had one TikTok video. I think it's almost at 500,000 views.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like kind of what he's doing, like you could do, because he likes writing too. So he'll have a lot of written stuff that's Twitter's more for that space of written, and then he shares the little bit that's written. But I look at what he's doing, and in your space, you could do that same thing, because he's doing the writing piece, he does some video piece, and I mean the engagement that I'm seeing on his stuff is really, he's getting a lot of engagement, and that's the space of leadership specifically, but with what trauma or however that would be for you, kind of what he's doing.
With a tweet or a tweet thread, or 50-second video or something.
Yep.
He does a marvelous job of getting useful, meaningful content out regularly and simply.
Yeah, he's someone that I would say, like, hit him up, and he'll know that you've been on here. But I don't know, get coffee or something and say, hey, Trav said I should talk to you, because what he's doing, I feel like you could totally use that kind of blueprint, but with what your topic would be. And I just, he's really getting a lot of engagement on different platforms and whatnot.
Yeah, that is exciting. I actually had the thought of talking with Espinoza about some writing that he had done. And collaborating on some writing. So I do need to share more. I think about sharing all the time, and then I end up with, my 1 page of thoughts goes to 20 pages and goes to 40 pages, and that's not a TikTok video. That's closing in on a book, and then I go, shoot, can I pare it down to 10 pages? What I do with the other pages, and I could write a book, and that's another year's worth of work. So I think the main problem for me is self-discipline, and just scheduling the time to put my butt in the chair.
Well, literally, this video on TikTok that he made that has almost 500,000 views and a bazillion comments, it's him drawing on a dry erase board, like I think it's circles or squares, and it's basically how to be more efficient and where to spend your time. So spend time, something to that regard of this, not this. So he's also someone I think that could help with that, help with that management, or pare it down like this, or use it like, because that's a lot of the stuff he's kind of advocating for. In terms of the leadership, and
does some life coaching and is very good at it. Is my impression.
I think he's someone you should definitely talk with, because I just see his space of leadership. You could be in that same thing with trauma or whatever, however you would categorize that, but the stuff he's doing, I feel like you would love to be doing those kind of things.
I would. That's good.
Well, I appreciate you sharing. I look forward to hearing from you, the feedback that you get from this. I always, kind of check in, or people will let me know, hey, this, that, or the other thing. And so it's been encouraging hearing all those different things.
Good. Yeah.
So
I'll let you know for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool.